Well, hello everybody and welcome to Pro Manchester's very first webinar. I do wish that that was under slightly better circumstances, but obviously it is in response to the COVID-19 outbreak. I'm just going to give a couple of minutes for a few more attendees to jump on. I can see the numbers speeding up as we just go past 4 o'clock, so we will be getting started in just a few moments. Well, hello everybody. So for those of you who I haven't met in person before, my name's Ilona Alcock and I am the Sector Group Manager here at Pro Manchester. We are going to be running a weekly series of COVID-19 roundup webinars, and the reason for doing that is obviously that there is a huge amount of information coming out all of the time, and it's very, very difficult to stay on top of that, to pick through the detail, to understand what it means for businesses in different sectors and to have an idea as what's coming next. Generally at Pro Manchester, everything we do, as the name suggests, is fairly Manchester focused. We've got a view on what goes on in the region. We have kind of a bit of an eye on what's happening nationally and globally, but more than ever, it is that big picture that we want to be having a look at. Everybody's looking to Italy, to Spain, to see what might be coming our way, and to see how other countries are handling the restrictions and the various ways of support. So I'm delighted that within our membership we have Grayling PR, who were phenomenally useful over the last few years in navigating through the Brexit uncertainty and the world of politics that was going on then. I know a number of you will already receive the daily Grayling update bulletins. We have been sharing those out on Pro Manchester's newsroom, and Chris Peacock and the team at Grayling have done a really, really good job of trying to stay on top of everything that's going on and putting that into context. So I'm shortly going to introduce to you the two presenters that we'll have today. So we will have, I'm just bringing their details up so you should hopefully be able to see them, Dickie Jukes, who is the chairman of Grayling UK and Ireland, sorry, Grayling Europe, UK and Ireland, and Chris Peacock, who is the Director of Public Affairs for Grayling Manchester. They're between them going to cover off both that local focus and a more general overview of what's going on. And then towards the end of this session, we will be opening up to any questions. You should all have the Q&A function live as part of your chat function. If you do have any questions, please just pop those in there. Initially, they are just visible to me, so if you have any kind of private questions, anything about the kind of recording, any kind of technical issues that we might be facing, drop those in there and I'll pick them up. If there are any more general questions that you want to be picked up by Chris or Dickie, then I'll publish those so that the group can see. So without further ado, I'm going to pass over to Chris, who's going to kick off with a start of the local focus and what's going on in Greater Manchester. Over to you, Chris.
Thank you very much, Ilona, and thank you again to Pro Manchester for helping us host today and facilitating today. It has come off. This has all come off the back on the daily briefings that we're doing, and it's great to know that they're really popular. People want to know what's going on, and hopefully these weekly briefings as well will give plenty of people the opportunity to understand a little more what's happening. So I'll cover off the local area and then Dickie's going to join me afterwards just to cover the more national and wider approach. So in terms of Greater Manchester, what's happening here, I think it's particularly pertinent to note how proactive Andy Burnham is being as our Metro Mayor. Compared to other areas who've got Metro Mayors, I don't think any of them have had the amount of coverage that he's had nationally talking about this crisis. I think that says a lot to his experience that we all know about, particularly as formerly as an MP, as a minister and as a shadow minister as well. But he's certainly using his role to get Greater Manchester's name out nationally, but also using it to really hold the government to account. I'll come back in a little bit. In terms of what's happening here in Greater Manchester, I think again, the combined authority and the City Council were particularly proactive in wanting to try and help businesses, community, employees, and the whole number of residents across the conurbation. And one thing I would mention, particularly, I think they've done very well at, is the setting up of 2 dedicated websites, and with support from the Growth Hub who are hosting it. The first particularly being for business advice. That one I would certainly advise people to look at and suggest that if you do have any specific detailed questions that we can't answer today, certainly have a look at that. But also they set up a coordinating volunteer website as well. Certainly well before the one that's gone national, which I think well over 100,000 people, I think there's 150,000 people have now signed up to, offering to volunteer to help support the NHS, and particularly with vulnerable people. That was done first in Manchester, and it has been very successful. I understand people are signing up to it quite regularly too. Again, in terms of the support the City Council and the Combined Authority are trying to do, they are trying to be really proactive. There is an element, though, of having to wait for the government to provide further detail, particularly around support for local business. A lot of the headlines we've seen and what has been talked about are there. However, some of the finer details of it are still yet to be ironed out. I know from looking today, the City Council are quite hopeful they'll have that detail by the end of this week. But more information is coming, and as I'm sure Dickie will pick up on later, there is yet more announcements probably going to come in the next 24 to 48 hours in regarding businesses too. I think one of the things that I'd like to point out, or rather note on, particularly around Andy Burnham and the whole of the city, in regards to calls and challenging government on how they're handling this. I don't think there is a degree. I don't think they're being deliberately critical for the sake of position's sake. With Andy obviously being the Labour mayor, plus having the Conservative government, but they are, or rather Andy's particularly challenging a number of different things, asking the government to look at more, particularly calling for greater clarity around the stay-at-home policy. Andy, as mayor, has held today his latest COVID-19 committee meeting with stakeholders across Greater Manchester. And I don't think they've yet published it live, but there has been a few comments reported on it, including one quote that's been reported by a couple of journalists, where Andy's saying that if you are a business that's still open and you're not involved in essential work, you should close now. So Andy's message to Greater Manchester business is very much, unless you're working as in essential areas of work, particularly helping with key workers, across the different sectors, he does not believe you should be working at the moment. That said, Andy's power does not allow him to be able to dictate which businesses should shut and which should be open. But it's very clear from his belief and what he wants to see happen. And I think that's a message that's going to continue from Andy to government and challenging the government on what they're doing around that. Similarly, Andy's been very powerful in terms of challenging the government around better financial pay for the self-employed, contractors, freelancers as well. And I think that is something we are likely to see from government soon. But again, we're waiting for further details on it. And finally, the other thing was in regards to homing the homeless. Again, since Andy has become mayor, one of his big passions, as all of us who work in the city centre and work across Manchester know, is trying to reduce sleeping and help those people who are homeless. Now, it's just been announced as part of his committee on COVID-19 today that he has signed off a £5 million package to pay for 1,000 hotel rooms across Greater Manchester. Now, from what I understand, that is for people who are currently in shared or temporary accommodation, and up to about 280 rough sleepers who are still in the city. So again, it's an example of Andy using his position as the mayor of Greater Manchester, using what funds he does have available to him to try and direct it where he feels the need is most needed. It is something that we have seen from him as mayor well before this crisis, and I think it's something we're going to see continue. In terms of what's going to happen next in Greater Manchester, I think we will see more of Andy picking up that mantle, appearing on things like Question Time, the news channels in the morning and the evening, challenging government on what's going on. I think there has been a degree of a vacuum from the opposition in Parliament challenging government on this, and Andy, I think, has seen this as an opportunity for him. So I suspect we'll see more of Andy speaking up on these issues, and I think as time goes by, as more details are passed down to the City Council from central government, I think more announcements similar to today where they want to try and direct support, particularly for businesses and particularly for residents who are most in need. So with that, that's kind of an overview of the wider Manchester area. So I was going to now pass over to our chairman, Dickie, who hopefully can pick up on that national and international view.
Well, Chris, thank you very much for that, and thank you very much, Chris, for that, and thank you for inviting me onto this webinar. There was an awful lot of detail about what's going on in Manchester. I think you're absolutely right, Chris, to say that I think the political response from mayors and national politicians of all parties so far has been pretty unified, and I think that's been enormously helpful, and we may come on to talk a bit about how that dynamic may change in the future. I mean, I think everybody is aware that the government has unleashed an unprecedented amount of money to support individuals and businesses through this crisis. In the region of £330 billion has been announced to date. There have been regular updates around exactly, I think there are 20 plus schemes that are now available to people in all sorts of different walks of life and different sectors. The Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, has confirmed that he will be announcing tomorrow at the government press conference some information about what he's planning to do for those who are self-employed. I haven't got the figure to hand, but I think it's something like 1.7 million people who may be affected by some additional support, which is long overdue. I don't think it's because of a lack of will to help people who are self-employed. I think it was getting the detail right so it could actually work in practice, but we'll hear more about that tomorrow. In terms of what has happened today in the UK, there's been a variety of smaller, to some extent, announcements. First thing is the House of Commons will rise this evening a week early. It's not expected back until the 21st of April. The leader of the House of Commons, Jacob Rees-Mogg, said, and even that could be extended depending on where we are with this whole crisis. They've announced that companies will have an extra 3 months to file their accounts with Companies House. They've suspended the enforcement of the gender pay cap deadline for reporting. There's been, in the last few hours, an extended the exemption categories for business rates, I think to cover bookies, estate agents, bingo halls, and other professional services offices. And I expect there will be more fine-tuning of announcements of packages. Obviously they're working at pace. And when they make an announcement, it always throws up some questions that need to be answered. I would urge you, if you haven't already discovered it, the government has set up a sort of one-stop shop website which details all of the packages available to businesses, called, unsurprisingly, businesssupport.gov.uk. We can send around the link, I imagine, after this. It's a very useful summary of exactly where to go depending on the issues you are facing. I guess it's worth pausing just for a moment to consider how the UK government's response to this compares to others in Europe. And for example, France has announced 300 billion euros of state-backed loans and a further 45 billion euros in tax breaks. Italy, a rescue package of 25 billion and possible one-off payments of €500 per person. Germany looking at in the region of 500 billion pounds worth of loans to be made available to companies. Spain, 200 billion. And of course, the big news overnight from the States is the agreement at last for a $1.8 trillion support package that has been agreed by Congress. I did look up how many noughts was in a trillion, and I gave up because it was such a huge number. It sort of no longer made any sense to me whatsoever. But I think that shows that and the EU itself is doing certain things in terms of reducing the burden of regulation on companies right across the EU. So there is a relatively similar response from some of our major competitors and trading partners. My sense, and of course it is just a sense, my sense is that the major changes to the infrastructure around regulation, taxation, and the support available to companies and to individuals, notwithstanding the announcement tomorrow on the self-employed, is sort of, we're getting to the fundamentals are now in place, the infrastructure is in place. There will undoubtedly be fine-tuning, there will be responses to a changing economic issues. I still think there need to be a little more clarity around who can go to work and who can't. There's been a lot in the press and indeed in Parliament today around, for example, construction companies, with some closing their sites, some continuing to work. I think that needs to be clarified, and at some point it will be. I mean, actually, there's been a lot of criticism of the government saying your messaging isn't clear. And I think this leads on to sort of one further observation I might make before I return to the questions is, I think the government has been quite clear. It is, if you don't have to go out and about, then don't go out and about. And I think that some businesses, and we're beginning to see the media picking up on this, are not exercising the sort of, if I can, don't want to be too over the top of this, but the moral leadership at the moment. You know, those companies that are doing the right thing are getting the credit, but those who aren't, and there are some examples of this, are being heavily criticised. And I think as this whole crisis evolves, and the media, the print media in particular, or some elements of it, looking for their new angle, are increasingly looking for heroes and villains. And I think the way in which we as businesses respond to this, both with our clients, our colleagues, the broader communities in which we operate, the way we respond to this could define our reputations for some time to come. And I think it is a very important point, perhaps for later on if we have time, exactly how we respond. You know, when there's a sense of real national purpose, you're either with it or you're against it. And I think we need to take stock of that as we go forward. I'll leave it there, Chris, and you may have questions, or others obviously may have questions, if that's right.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks so much for that, Dickie. So we have had some questions already sent over to us before today. However, obviously we are getting a couple of questions coming through as we're talking live as well. And actually, Dickie, the question that we've just been actually feeds on very interestingly from what you were just saying then about how do we respond to that. And if I just read out the question, it's quite lengthy, so bear with me a moment. It says, should we, as in those in advertising, marketing and PR, specifically DMOs, hotels and leisure, etc., continue to be active by looking at the opportunity, demonstrating the steps the brand is taking and motivate support, as we feel we should encourage brands, etc., and motivate support as we feel we should encourage brands, etc., to press pause but continue activity instead of stopping, which is what we're seeing now, i.e. now's the time to be innovative. So do we think that people should still be active but being innovative, using new ways of communicating or new messaging around communicating, rather than simply putting a halt to everything?
Well, I think it's a question that goes to the heart of what many of us do, and I think actually goes beyond just PR and marketing and advertising. I think this is a time where brands need to demonstrate that they are supportive. I mean, going back to the point I made a moment ago, you know, there is a sense that there is national purpose. there is a clear desire to do the right thing and to support the NHS, communities, the vulnerable, and so on and so forth. And any business that is able to do that, and able, if I can say, inject some humanity into their business practices, and demonstrably to show that they are part of the solution and work with it, I think will pay dividends. I mean, we've seen the example of Jamie Timpson of the shoe shop business having to close his shops, but very publicly saying, I will continue to pay my staff throughout this process. And then on the flip side, we've seen a well-known pub chain who has effectively said, well, we don't need you, go and find a job elsewhere. Now, you know, when all this is over, there will be, I believe there will be some reckoning about those businesses and individuals who, for want of a better expression, have had a good war, and those who have had a bad war. And I think the public and the consumers and public opinion will judge quite harshly on that. I mean, I actually think that this whole crisis, you know, when we emerge, as I said, I think the world we left behind when we locked our doors only a few short days ago will be on the surface the same world that we find when we emerge from our bunker. But in many respects, it will have changed beyond all recognition. I mean, the contract between the governed and those and the government, I think, will be rewritten. And likewise, I think the contract, insofar as one exists between businesses and consumers, will also be rewritten. I think people, there was a sort of fog and clutter before this all happened about what was acceptable and what wasn't, and well, that's how it works and that's how the world goes around. I think there's greater clarity with consumers and the media and with politicians about what is acceptable, who are the new heroes, and what makes a hero. And the decisions that we take now as businesses, they don't appear to chime with the new humanity, for want, as I say, of a better expression. They'll be judged very harshly. So, I mean, that's a rather rambling answer. I mean, in terms of being innovative, yes, be supportive, demonstrate that you are part of the solution, demonstrate that you have empathy with your customers and your consumers, and that you are being supportive. You will, not only is it the right thing to do because it's the right thing to do, it's the right thing to do because you will get rewarded, I believe, by consumers and others for doing it.
Mm-hmm. No, that's really good, Vicky. Actually, I completely agree with you on that. I think it's so important now to, as you say, demonstrate your humanity in this period. I think it's particularly when people talk around social media and how do you have a successful social media presence, and particularly on Twitter and Instagram and so on. It is about demonstrating that humanity that you have, and now that's ever more so important than that. Just thinking, going back to one of the things you mentioned then about national purpose and doing the right thing, one of the questions that we were sent earlier actually was around whether or not, because of the need for the nation to come together, whether we might see politics do the same. Do you think there will be a government of national unity, and where we will see politicians from all the different divides coming together to lead the country forward?
Well, I think to some extent that has happened informally. As I say, I think there has been a coalition of the willing in Parliament to back the Prime Minister. I've no doubt that many on the opposition benches have reservations about the Prime Minister's decisions and the speed and pace and so on and so forth. But so far they have all pulled together. Today was Jeremy Corbyn's last PMQs as leader of the Labour Party, and next week we will have a new leader appointed. Presumably that will be Keir Starmer, who will bring a very different approach to the role, I suspect. Look, I think there is pressure, undoubtedly, for a government of national unity. I think in some ways that might be appealing to a government that knows that if they get this wrong, and they probably will make a number of mistakes, they probably have done already, then they will never be forgiven by a British public who had to put their trust in them. And there is some rather cynical pressure, perhaps, to say, well, let's bring in all the parties and then we all fall or survive together. I don't think that is necessarily what's going to happen. I think there'll be resistance in number 10. I don't think Dominic Cummings, for example, and others necessarily want to bring in the new leader of the opposition into government in some formal capacity. However, I think it is likely, probable that Keir Starmer, if it is he, and others of his new shadow cabinet may well be invited to join some of the Cobra deliberations as decisions need to be taken. I think that's more likely than a government of national unity, and in some ways, it's perhaps a bit of a distraction, provided there is general consensus about the way in which the government is handling things. But I think it would be good for our politics to bring it, particularly when we've suspended the normal rules of engagement. I think it would be good for our politics to allow all voices to be heard. At some point, however, someone has, the buck has to stop somewhere, and I think at the end of the day, it will be the Prime Minister who takes the decisions. But it depends how long this rumbles on for. And there are some encouraging signs coming out of some of the other countries that are ahead of us in the curve, that they may well be seeing the peak. And of course, another announcement today is that the sort of self-test equipment may be ready in a matter of days, not for the whole country, but being rolled out, as opposed to a couple of weeks. And I'm sure we'll be reading more about that tomorrow in terms of the speed of that. But the Prime Minister certainly was indicating that they should be doing, I think, this is from memory, so maybe wrong, but 25,000 tests per day within 3 weeks. I mean, that's still a long way to go when you consider that there are 70 million people in the country, but it's at least quicker than some had feared.
Yeah, no, certainly. I think one of the things to pick up on that actually is how quickly things are evolving around the coronavirus and the government's response to it. I was joking with someone earlier today about how a year ago, when we were looking at Brexit and we were producing Brexit briefings, there was a jaw-dropping, I can't believe this is happening moments nearly every week, whereas now it feels almost every 24 hours there is a new major announcement, there's a new major thing happening. And keeping a pace of that is both challenging and knackering, to put it at best. But I think just picking up on another question, or rather comments we've had from a couple of the Q&As, is someone's put in more than an ask than a question. GMCA and the GC are trying to reach out to senior leaders in food and retail to supplement the national national support around food to vulnerable households, and also how an example of Tesco have sent all their elderly and vulnerable staff home on full pay for 12 weeks. And just picking up on that, I think last question I'll probably say in terms of the time we've got. Do you think, you mentioned a couple of good examples of businesses working well. Do you think that across the country we are seeing that real positive coming together from business, trying to get through this and to deliver what needs to be done for the good, not just the good of the country, but for the health of the citizens of the UK as well?
Well, yes, look, I think undoubtedly. I mean, the overwhelming majority of people in this country, and indeed across Europe and more broadly, will always seek to do the right thing. And as businesses, they will seek to do the right thing, and they will work with common purpose to see us through this. I've no doubt about that, both great and large. I think some people have misjudged it. I think they've moved too quickly to lay off people who don't have the financial resilience that their bosses have, and they've appeared tin-eared and in some cases just outrightly callous. But that's a very small minority. I mean, I think that most businesses the vast majority are, of course, doing exactly what they should be doing and responding in exactly the right way. My one word of caution for when this is all over is that at some point, things will change, and there will be a maybe great demand, populist demand. I'm looking at the time. I'll be very quick. A populist demand for change, and not all of that change will be the right change. It may be that something done must be done brigade get the upper hand. Businesses will have to be very careful about how they balance making their case where change is not necessary without looking as though they are part of some ancien regime that hasn't heard what the people are saying in response to all this. And I think that's an interesting challenge, perhaps for another edition of the webinar.
Definitely, thank you for that, Dickie, and thank you very much. I think we better call our close. We said we wanted to keep this just 30 minutes because we know how busy everyone is at the moment, so we wanted to keep it quite brief. But please get in touch with, I'll pass over to Ilona in a second, but please get in touch with Ilona and Pro Manchester and myself if you've got any other questions. If there's anything else you want to know about or what you'd like to hear from us in this webinar. Like we said, this is the first one we've tried today, so we'd love to get your feedback. If there's anything you want us to talk about or any subjects specifically you want us to look at, just let us know. And with that, I'll pass it back to Ilona to round it off.
That's wonderful. Thanks ever so much to both of you. Obviously, really appreciate having you on hand for that support and advice. It is an incredibly fast-moving situation. One of the things that was mentioned there was the government website that is collating together the various packages of support. We do now have live on the Pro Manchester website a page dedicated to corona support for businesses, which includes the links through to the government website for rates deferrals, loan schemes, and also the Business Growth Hub doing things at a regional level. We will keep updating that to try and direct you to the best places of support. But now more than ever, we really do want to keep those channels of communication open with our members. We've heard a lot about the kind of the good and bad of business, and I just have to say on behalf of Pro Manchester, we have been overwhelmed by just how collaborative and supportive our members have been. So please do keep your content coming, keep your questions coming, and we'll do what we can to keep signposting everybody in the right direction. We are intending to keep these webinars going on a Wednesday afternoon. The dates are live already until the end of April, and we will keep that under review. On the feedback email for this, I will include the link through to Chris's details if you do want to sign up to those daily bulletins. There's something that I can highly recommend for keeping up to date with everything. So that is basically it from us. Thank you ever so much for joining us. Thank you for bearing with us as we get to grips with all of the technology. I'm just leaving you there with Dickie and Chris's details, but please do just get in touch with any of us for further information. And yeah, stay home, stay safe, and we look forward to speaking with you all again soon.